So good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are from. It's good to have you here for the Tech Talk 4. So the session will be for 60 minutes, then we'll have a 30 minutes Q&A and a little bit of house rules. So if you're driving, kindly stop at a safe place for duration of the webinar, and hope you're aware of the surroundings. And the questions will be managed by MS Teams Q&A. You have a button there where you can share your questions and we'll get back to you. Do not enter any questions into the chat message, so as that may go missed. So feedback form will be shared at the end of session, and as usual, the certificate of participation will be provided for all those who attend the session and submit the feedback form. All right. So one of the speakers today is Vladimir Dashchenko. He is a security evangelist and a security expert, currently working at Kaspersky ICS Cert. He has formerly worked in Threat Intelligence, which was a security startup, and he is responsible for integrating threat intelligence into the risk analysis platform. So he also has experience in researching vulnerabilities, threats, and various types of analysis and detection for ICSCYBERSECURITY, and also has done audits for various smart devices and so on. And he also has participated in various events and conferences worldwide. Good to have you here, Vladimir. So the next speaker for today is Salman Shaikh, a colleague of Vladimir as well. Salman is a senior security researcher at Kaspersky ICS Cert. He has worked as a threat hunter, threat intelligence analyst, detection engineer, incident response consultant, and also as a security operations analyst. So his work and experience has been focused towards research and analysis of advanced persistent threats who target the industrial organizations, or as we know, critical infrastructure. So he has worked in reverse engineering, which is quite interesting. So he actively investigates and analyzes all the modern day malware campaigns that we see. Hopefully we get to hear a bit about him, his experience and research. Nice to have you here, Salman. So everyone, kindly follow, if you are not already following, kindly follow our LinkedIn page and also join our LinkedIn group. We are also available in WhatsApp. Let's go into the session. So Vladimir or Salman, who would like to have the controls?
I mean, it's okay if you wanna take us over. I'm happy as well. Yeah.
No worries then. Fine. All right, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Yeah, I think hey, thanks for having us here. It was a pleasure indeed to know a lot of colleagues, a lot of folks from different industry. So we are going to cover some thoughts on threat landscape, forecast, and hunting in the era of Industry 4.0. Next slide, please. So these are some of the contents which we are going to talk about: demystifying common myths in ICS and OT, attacks in industrial organization, and threat actors who are active in the APAC region, and threat landscape in the APAC, what to expect in the APAC region, most noteworthy techniques and tactics in the future attacks, and threat hunting in the era of Industry 4.0. Why is there a need? So let's start with demystifying common myths in ICS and OT. Vladimir, if you want to take over, get started now.
Of course. Thank you, Salman. So we do know from the previous, from our experience, that there are like so many myths around ICS or OT cybersecurity. And the first and the most important myth is basically that industrial control systems and industrial networks, they are basically air gap. So there is like an air gap between the IT network and OT network. So I think for the last 10 years, maybe a little bit more. This is not true. This is absolutely not true. So there are so little industrial control systems that are really air-gapped. In fact, in real life, based on our penetration testing experience and based on our security research experience and the publicly known examples how industrial control systems are encrypted by ransomware, we will be talking about this a little bit later. Based on that, we can definitely say that those things, they are not air-gapped at all, most of them. The second important thing is that industrial control systems are based on the proprietary protocol. Yes, this is true. Exactly, this is true. But those proprietary protocols, they are not something like a rocket science. So attackers, they do have an ability to understand the industrial protocol, what are the communication standard is behind, and so on and so forth. So this is not like a stop factor. Third thing, the firewall. No, firewall does not protect you on 100%. It does not give you like a 100% protection from the attacks coming from the IT systems or from internet, even from internet. We do see examples when industrial control systems are being attacked from the internet, and we will be proving this statement by our statistics. The fourth and very important thing that APT and advanced persistent threat actors only target large enterprises. No, they're not. They absolutely not. They are targeting industrial control systems as well. There are several examples when, for example, again, ransomware families, they are including to their ransomware software the file extensions that belong to industrial control systems like backup copies, data historian files, and so on and so forth. Next one, the fifth, is that IT tools can detect most of ICS attacks. Unfortunately, no. You need to have special dedicated protection software, security software to detect ICS focused attacks or the attacks that can be focused on the industrial control systems. And last but not least, that there are not so many industrial attacks. This is partly true. There are only few known, publicly known APT stories when APT actor is targeting industrial control system to stop the technological process. But in fact, there are so many actors and examples when APT actor is attacking industrial control system without using the industrial, for example, software. So those myths, they are basically being only myths, but in real life, we do have absolutely different pictures. So Salman, can you please continue?
Yeah, I think the last part I'd like to touch here. I mean, there aren't much OT threats. Yeah, I mean, it's one of the biggest myth. Yeah, I mean, there are a bunch of reports, bunch of case studies about attacks which are specific to industrial control systems or OT or ICS malware. But these are known to public because, yeah, it had some kind of impact or it had some kind of political agenda behind it. But there are a lot of other threats. There are a lot of other threat actors who are still active, but they are quite smart. They are still, they are very persistent. They would not just declare just like so-called other threat actors that, okay, we have breached this company. This data is available to everyone. So yeah, there are a lot of threat actors not similar to typical ransomware or finance motive ones, which are still active in the region. But since they tend to be persistent in the network for a while, we don't come to know about it. And that's the agenda behind this talk, to try and see what threat actors are active, not necessarily causing a huge destruction, but they are on the network. And how do we see it? Because of the huge network or huge data we have from tons of sensors across the globe. And just a disclaimer, not reported or no evidence is not equal to nothing has happened. There are threats which has happened, but the company has not reported or they don't have enough visibility to look into to dig deeper about what has actually happened, or they lack expertise in terms of is it a breach? We don't know. OK, let's move forward. So these are some of the industrial attacks which happened in the APAC. There was an attack on Goa flood monitoring system. There was some attack on JNPT a couple of times, Kojima Industries. So if you see, not every victim is like a big organization, but there are some organization or some victims which are small. But because these small organizations were targeted, it indirectly impacted the bigger vendors who were dependent on them for their product, or for some product which they require for manufacturing, etc. So yeah, next slide, please. So these are some of the threat actors which are active in the APAC. At the right side, you'll see the typical ransomware gangs who'll do a mass campaign. They don't bother about the victims. They just target everyone, send a spear phishing email. But at the left, these are some of the advanced persistent threats. These are some threat actors who would stay on the network for a while, and they would hardly cause any unusual events or unusual activity on the network. Yeah, next slide, please. So let's talk about threat landscape in the APAC. Yeah, we are going to cover a couple of items. One is world versus APAC, threat landscape by industry and country, and what are the threat types which we see. Yeah, Vladimir, you want to take over this one?
Yeah, the most important thing that I would like to mention first is that basically we are collecting data from the our basically customers only if they put like a check mark that they agree to share anonymized data with us, and based on that telemetry, we do have more than 1 million industrial computers in our telemetry. And here's the very interesting thing. So if we will take a look on the statistics, we see that there is a slightly big rise. So the number of blocked attacks is increasing in the second part of the 2021. It can be explained by different reasons. The increase in, let's say, geopolitical tensions between different countries in the region, or other things, or just attackers are trying to find more interesting targets. So here we see that the average number is around like from 30 to 40% that computers were attacked, computers that belong to industrial control systems. But if we will take on the global statistics, we see that some of the countries in our statistics, they do have a number of attacked computers around just 7 or 8%. It depends on the different things. On the local regulations, if local regulators, if the local government is basically putting a strict policies on the companies to protect industrial control systems. Next slide, please. So if we will take a look on the statistics based on the source of attacks, so I would like to point on my previous statement that the most number of attacks are coming from the internet. How it's happened? There are several reasons for that. First of all, we do have a lot of computers, industrial computers, directly connected to the internet for a set of the reasons. Because people need to exchange the data between different offices first. Second, sometimes operators, they just plug in modems or their phones just to create a hotspot. You know, when they get bored, so they want to check the emails, they want to go to social networks, check their messages, and so on and so forth. And while just average internet surfing, they can just click on the malicious link, and we can see that the more than 12%, 13.5% of infections are coming from malicious scripts and phishing pages. So this is very important. That means that people are using just random internet surfing and can be infected by different exploits and so on and so forth. So for today, we have prepared a tailored statistics for India, just for you to understand that we do have an ability to create different types of the statistics for region, for country, or based on the industry. Salman, can you please explain this statistics? So I'm passing the word to you. Salman, you are muted. Sorry.
Hey, thanks, buddy. Yeah, so we have stated stats based on various countries. If you see, these are some of the countries in the APAC, and yeah, we'll specifically focus on India for now. The reason being we have a lot of folks from India. So indeed, well explained by Vladimir that the threat landscape, it's not just numbers, it's not just blind numbers, it's not just stats, but these are some numbers which is directly or indirectly proportional to differences in the security maturity of a different countries or different industries, current focus of threat actors, or a geopolitical, geoeconomical situation of a country. A clear example is few years back in India, we had an initiative, Make in India, meaning we are not going to take products from specific countries where we don't have good relations with. This means there will be an increase in manufacturing industries in India. And some threats are taken from different industry. Like I said, an example of Kojima industry, which was breached. And due to that, there was some other organizations which were dependent on this industry. So threat landscape by industry. So these are some stats specific to industry, energy, manufacturing, oil and gas. So we provide stats for based on industry, country, or based on types of threats which would be specific to your organization. Let's say if you guys or if anyone is keen tomorrow, if you guys are saying, okay, we are from telecommunication or we are from hospital industry, can you help us to understand what are threats which is which we might face, or what types of threat actors would target us, who would target us, why would they target us. So these are some of the things which we could do, which means that we could prepare a tailored report for anyone or any industry or any company, or let's say if we have more folks which are from specific industry, we are happy to provide more stats. Yeah, so these are some of the threads most often used as initial access method. So if you see, yeah, majority of the attacks which we see, it's either via phishing email, where there's a suspicious link, and if you go, if the end user clicks that link, it leads to a page, a malicious page. Could be a domain squatting, a page which is similar to your internal organization or the company which you work for. So that is often seen as initial attack vectors. In most cases, yeah, corporate email is something where you would see such kind of threats. So if you see, if such initial threats are detected on high percentage of hosts in OT networks, this means the security measure in place in the respective organization were not sufficient or to block these threats before they reached the network host. So if you see at the right side, there's self-propagating threats, which could be worms, cryptocurrencies, miners. Most worms and virus are legacy threats which have no active C2C connection. I mean, we have seen based on our previous case studies where there are a bunch of threads which are still persistent on the machine, but the C2 is not active. So it mean it could be via spreading via removable drive, or could be via network share, or exploitation of a network service, or account abuse. Such threats re-emerge from time to time. Even if there's an outbreak, some of the threats would still remain in the backup, meaning we do see worms, viruses at this age. The reason being some OT engineer using some backup which was taken a while back and which was never seen. But since we have an ongoing incident, we need a backup. Can we try and look at our previous backups? Yeah, next slide, please. So the linear decrease in percentage of threats along the kill chain from the initial vector to next threats means the next stage in an attack is proportional to previous stage. Spywares, backdoors, or keyloggers. So these are some of the threats which you would not see instantly, which means if you see spyware or a backdoor on a keylogger on a machine, it means it's there in the system since a while, but we never recognized it. So ransomware is something which you would directly see, or which is very instant thing. Let's say if a company gets breached, and if it's a typical ransomware gang, they would not wait for longer. They would either go for the data, or they would either try to get as much money as they could from the company. Yeah, next slide, please. So the report is based on analysis of statistical data collected through Creation, a distributed AV network, and so we only grab data from users who have signed an agreement with us. And some of the machines which we look at is SCADA servers, data historians, OPCs, or a workstation of engineers or operators, HMIs, mobile workstation of engineers and operators, and we do it via machine learning, which means that we try to understand how OT or ICS environment would look like, and what types of events would be normal in OT network, and what type of events defines that, okay, this is an OT network and not a typical IT network. Yeah, I think next slide. Yeah, Vladimir, you wanna take over this one?
So yeah, thank you. So usually almost every year we create some futuristic forecast. So we do have like a big analytical database, and we provide the analysis of different things that are happening, that has happened over the past year or several years, and we try to understand where the technologies are developing right now and where the new threats will be moving for the next 1 or 2 or 3 years. And for this and the next year, for 2023 and 24, we have prepared a number of, let's say, predictions or forecasts. And unfortunately, most of them are started being real already. Just let's pick some of them. Well, unfortunately, the number of supply chain attacks will be growing, and supply chain attacks on the industrial companies. We also see that the APTs, advanced persistent threat attackers, they're switching a little bit focus on a different unusual, let's say, unusual industrial areas. For example, we believe and we see right now that the number of attacks on the renewable or green energy is increasing, because some of the countries, they're switching from the, let's say, classical energy like oil and gas to renewable energy like wind generation or solar generation facilities. And this brings more and more attention from the attackers. So they want to understand, basically they want to steal the information from those types of the facilities, or they want to attack, encrypt, and do some kind of ransomware things. We see that attackers, unfortunately, are using different AI, artificial intelligence approaches to create, let's say, phishing emails, to do social engineering attacks, and this is very concerning thing. And from our side, we are creating the technologies that allow us to detect usage of different AI technologies in the offensive operations. We see that the number of hacktivists again is rising, and this is also concerning thing. And right now, hacktivists are gathering in the different small groups, and those groups are being led by more advanced attackers, usually politically motivated attackers, and some other things. Based on these predictions, we see that attackers are using right now more advanced techniques to provide the attacks. You probably heard about, for example, watering hole attacks. So this is not really common, not really popular kind of attack, but it's getting more and more popular for the last several years because it brings, let's say, value for the attackers. So when they compromise, for example, a forum or a website devoted to like a special group of people, for example, local industrial engineers in one area, and using that type of compromise, they can do infection towards this tiny little group of people. So they can be lower the radars for a certain amount of time. We see that a lot of attackers right now are using DLL hijacking techniques. This is not a new technique, but it's getting more and more popular. Or they do use, let's say, bring your own vulnerable driver attack. This is a very important thing. So when the attacker is using legit driver, but that driver is outdated and contains vulnerabilities. So they do not use malware. They use a legit driver, install it on the system, and doing the attack towards the driver, they do have, for example, if they do have a remote code execution attack, they will have an ability to execute the code on a very low level. So it's not will be user space, but it will be like a kernel space, and it brings them a lot of let's say many options to do the later attacks. So and some other popular and unpopular tactics and techniques we believe that will be used in the next several years. Can we go on the next slide, please? And yes, right now I would like also to pass the word to Salman, and Salman will tell you how to become a threat hunter, right?
Yeah, I can try my best. So threat hunting in the era of Industry 4.0. We know threat hunting is a buzzword. It didn't started. It's not quite long since a lot of organizations started having their own threat hunting team, or either they are using an outsourced threat hunting team. So what as a security folks who are in ICS or OT, who are working in the OT or ICS environment, it is important for us to adapt to threat hunting as well. And we are going to talk a few things about threat hunting, why it helps. So there's a couple of thoughts which I come across lately. Can you go to the last slide? Yeah, intrusions are inevitable. No one is immune, and everyone needs to start thinking about this in terms of we will likely get breached, we will likely get compromised. But how do we stop the damage from being done? The right way to think about a security strategy is we are going to be breached, no matter how many preventive controls we have, no matter how many security toolings we have, we are going to get breached at some point. Or maybe there's always a machine. There's always a threat actor who has a foothold on some machine and anyone's network. And I think this approach is helps when you do threat hunting, because you have a strong belief that, okay, I'll find something. I know some machine is somewhere infected. So there's another thought where today's cybersecurity environment is like playing chess against 1,000 1,000 simultaneous chess against different opponents with variety of skill levels. Um, so yeah, I think we can defend 99% of the more junior players, script kiddies, or people using or threat actors who have their own handbook and they hire some folks and they'll simply execute script based on what is written in the playbook. And recently we have seen some leaks which has a clear step 1, step 2, step 3, but the top 2% requires real effort and strategy, which means uh, you wouldn't see them quite often. And if you see that there's something we need to address about, and it's something where we need to, um, and threat hunting is something where it will help us to find the remaining 2%. Yeah, next slide, please. So yeah, when it comes to threat hunting, there's a lot of questions. Where do I start? What if I don't find anything? Where do I find threads? How do I find them? How can I be more efficient? What tools, technologies do I need? And how long does one threat hunt, or how long do we need to spend on specific hypothesis? Next slide, please. So threat hunting is a yeah. Next slide, please. Yeah, John. I'm not sure if we lost John. Are you there, John?
Just hold on. Let me share. Let me share. If John is not there.
Okay, cool. Yeah. So
John
threat
is back.
hunting is a loose methodology where you formulate a hypothesis. Uh, so when it comes to threat hunting, the first word comes on everyone's mind, or threat hunter's mind, it hypothesis. So first thing we do is formulate a hypothesis. Look for it in the environment. If the hypothesis is not proven, which means if it's not good enough, let's go back and try to come up with some hypothesis. And then let's look for it in the environment again, research and optimize. And let's say if we hunt using some hypothesis in the environment, if we find anything suspicious, for example, if we see, let's say tomorrow, there's a new technique which can be used to dump LSAS. And we know that this is not a, let's say if an attacker dumps LSAS and he uses ordinal number instead of the function name. So attacker invokes run DLL32 and then ordinal number of mini dump right API call instead of using the actual function name. So let's say if some threat actor uses this technique, so we could use this hypothesis to see, okay, do we see run DLL32 execution with ordinal in the command line arguments? And if we see some evidence that this means there's something which has to be investigated, either respond to an incident or develop new detection content. So yeah, threat hunting is a loose methodology, which means there's no step 1, 2, 3 or ABC, which everyone has to follow. It depends on environment to environment. But the idea is not just wait for something bad to happen, but how could we proactively look into our environment using hypothesis rather than IOCs, IPs, domains, URLs, or file names, or hashes? How can we shift our focus from IOC-based approach to hypothesis-based approach? And how can we shift our focus from a reactive approach to proactive approach? Next slide, please. So as I said, it's all about hypothesis. Let's say tomorrow in your environment, in an endpoint, you see some binary executing msbuild.exe and then msbuild.exe invoking a child process cac.exe, and then msbuild.exe uses maybe virtual alloc, write process memory, or create remote thread, some API calls, which is often seen during injection of a payload into a remote process. And let's say if that child cac.exe reaches out to internet. So how traditional SOC sees it. I'm not saying that every stock still is the same. This is so traditional SOC means when SOC began. I know I've been there. I know a lot of us have been in that phase where we only used to have AV logs or firewall logs, and they say, okay, you have to deal with it. You have to find, you have to investigate, you have to do end-to-end analysis. So how traditional SOC sees this network connection? Yeah, maybe a firewall log, there's a connection towards malicious IP, but what if the connection is not towards malicious IP? It's an IP which has never been seen before. AV alerts on an endpoint. Maybe let's say for advanced APT threat actors would never use same payloads. Example, they would never use payload generated by Metasploit. They would never use payload generated by Cobalt Strike, or so they would definitely come up with a custom version, or they would create a custom payload. How threat hunter sees it, they would see, okay, I see msbuild.exe spawning a child process, and that child is reaching out to internet. msbuild.exe, do I see any command line arguments with msbuild.exe? msbuild.exe spawning from an abnormal parent process. msbuild.exe spawning from abnormal grandparent process. File creation from msbuild.exe, or child of msbuild.exe creating some file, or some registry being written from csc.exe, or msbuild.exe invoking create remote thread. Is it normal? How often do we see this? Do we see this? Is it a legit behavior? Is msbuild.exe, does msbuild.exe has capability to do this? Next slide, please. So I think the key to threat hunt in your environment is do not hesitate. Ask questions to yourself or to the events you see, whether it be anything, whether it be your process CTW, your process logs, or firewall logs, or network logs, or whether it be some custom application based log. Ask questions. Some of the questions which usually threat hunters would ask is, what is msbuild.exe? How often does msbuild.exe execute? What is the default path from which msbuild.exe executes? How is msbuild.exe normally leveraged? What does the legit execution look like? Does msbuild.exe spawns a child? What are the common child process? What are the common grandparent process for msbuild? What are the common parent process? Does msbuild.exe has capability to create a file? Does csc.exe has ability to touch your registry? So these are some of the questions which I would lean on, or which any threat hunter would lean on when they see something odd, or when they see some events. Um, uh, uh, don't just I would say, yeah, try to dig deeper to understand, is it normal, rather than is it malicious? Is it malicious is a vague word where you cannot find a direct answer by looking at some event. But if you try to answer, is it normal? And what Microsoft has said about msbuild.exe, what does their blog says about how msbuild.exe can be leveraged? Next slide, please. So these are some of the questions which you need to prepare. Let's say tomorrow, if anyone thinks, yeah, this is an interesting area where we should dig in our environment. So some of the questions where I would personally start with is, who would target your organization? So try to understand, okay, let's say if I'm a manufacturing company, who would target your organization? Industrial opportunist attackers, a variation of opportunist attackers who would target industrial sector in particular, which means some threat actors would not just target everyone, but they would specifically target maybe a manufacturing company, or some specific organization. So these attackers try to exploit any 0 days, or um, try to infiltrate into network via some unknown technique. And this is where threat hunting helps, where you don't have signature based detection, but you have some detection rules in place to detect threats based on what's abnormal or unusual in an environment. So who else would target your organization? Is it your competitor? Let's say tomorrow you're a manufacturing company. Tomorrow you come up with some new product, and you know there are tons of competitor out there who already have a similar product. So so there's a probability that, okay, some of your competitors might try to steal some data or some blueprints or some technical information, or some ingredients, or some other possibility could be insider threats, or APT threats. So these, as I said, APT could be large scale, and they are indeed tracked by security communities, and it's not easy to stop them. At the same time, it's not easy to detect them. Hacktivist, so these attackers have ideological goals in mind. So what would someone be after? Next question would be, for a manufacturing plant, what's most important? What's crown jewel for me? Is it your roadmap or your recipe, or maybe are they trying to hinder some product quality by tampering with the recipe, or maybe someone is trying to hinder the product quality to damage your reputation. So how would someone try to get a foothold on your network? So you need to come up with some list in terms of what are the probable initial access methods, which is specific to your industry. What systems are exposed to internet? So why would someone target your organization? Um, well, yeah, indeed. It depends on various motive. Um, and the right is, why is there a need? So well, threat actors have started getting smarter, and they have started using novel approaches which has never been seen before. And I, I mean, I'm sure no one in the session can say, okay, our environment is 100% clean of threats, or we can say that we have everything in place. No system in our environment is compromised. Um, so why is there a need? Maybe to assess cybersecurity posture of your environment, maybe to detect threats on an early stage. So rather than having a big damage to your organization, so we do threat hunt to ensure that we detect threats on a timely basis, meaning that we detect threats, or we detect early threats, which could be we are detecting some threats where we know that threat actor has just got into the network and there's no lateral movement yet. So threat hunting is indeed helps us to detect threats before the bigger damage takes place. So why shift focus from reactive approach to proactive? Um, so I think, yeah, looking at the various case studies, we all could agree that whereas industrial attacks which has happened has had more impact due to the fact that not every organization is ready to handle and respond to various industrial attacks, because they have never seen an attack. Uh, what I mean by this is they have never experienced it in their environment, because every major attacks which we see, there's tons of case studies, but have you personally dealt with it? And threat hunting indeed would help us to detect some threats um, before the bigger damage. So that's the reason we should shift our focus from reactive based approach, because let's say tomorrow if some incident happened in your environment, it means attacker has already maybe he has already encrypted some data, or he has already exfiltrated some data towards some he has already exfiltrated some data. um, so also it helps to mitigate threats in timely fashion rather than handling an incident in the chaos. Yeah, next slide, please. So some skill sets which are required for threat hunt. So I mean, honestly, I think there's no prerequisite. Uh, any IT or cybersecurity folks who want to get started with threat hunting, all you need is ask questions. Familiarity with TTP seen in the wild. Um, um, like if you see every attack, every company or every organization have shifted their focus from IOC based approach to TTP based approach, because IOCs keep changing. IPs, domains, URL. Mm, it's hardly active for a month or two. Threat actors keep moving, keep shifting, keep changing their infrastructure. So understanding your stack and its capabilities. So you need to understand your stack in terms of, okay, if I'm a manufacturing company, um, what what technology do I have? What toolings do I have? Do I have any? Do we have any threat hunting platform? Do we have SIM? Do we have EDR? Do we have XDR? Or uh, where can I hunt? Understanding of ICSO OT network protocols in your estate. So it helps to understand what protocols is specific to your environment, because you might not see every protocols in your environment, but you would hardly see a few based on what vendor tooling do you use. Understanding various ways to hunt in the estate, understanding how threat adversary operates. So being in the defensive or being on the defensive side, um, I think um, you need to be focusing on how a threat actor would get into your environment. What toolings, techniques would he use? Good TTP muscle memory, meaning so let's say tomorrow in your SOC or maybe in your threat hunting team, you see some alert, and if you are already aware of what this technique is, let's say you see run DLL32 with no command line arguments. And if you know that, okay, I know some threat actors are using this technique where they inject payload in RAL DLL32, and then they beacon out to the external world. So if if you already go through various blogs or if you already have an idea about what TTP is, it will help you during your investigation when you initially see an alert. Um, Ability to generate a hypothesis. I think it will come gradually as you see more events, as you try and explore various types of telemetries which exist. Understanding your telemetry, meaning understanding what types of logs do you have. Do you have maybe process CTW? Do you have registry create, registry write, registry delete? Do you have bits admin activity logging? Do you have partial logging? Do you have AMC-ETW? Do you have threat intel ETW? So understanding what telemetry is specific to your environment makes it easy for um, you to get started in terms of, okay, I know I have these logs. I'll get started. I'll get started on hunting on these logs first. Understanding ICS MITRE framework, I think, yeah, even easier. You could use ICS MITRE framework where uh, you could say, okay, this week we are going to get started with initial access, or this week or this month we are going to focus on lateral movement techniques, and we are going to hunt on various techniques abused by threat actors. Understanding a thin line of difference between normal traffic and usual one. Indeed, it comes with experience, but um, for that experience, obviously we need to start somewhere. Knowing when to stop. Yeah, I think it is important to know when you're hunting. You need to know when to stop, because you might fall in various rabbit holes. Asking right questions, as I said, yeah. Understanding what hunting methods are applicable to your environment, what data types do you have, and what properties do you have? What do you know about your environment? What's anomalous for my environment? What are rare activities? What are standard activities? What is expected in my environment? Identify familiar entities across data types, meaning, yeah, what types of log sets we have and what log sets are more interesting. Pivot, provide additional context, um, meaning when you know, okay, I have AMC-ETW. what can I do with AMCTW? Build out a story. Okay, I've seen whenever obfuscated script executes in an environment, if you have AMCTW enabled, you don't need to deobfuscate script manually because AMCTW does it for you, and it is one of the ETW feed provided by Microsoft, and anyone can enable it. Um, so I think you're building a matrix of what you have in your environment, and what you could do with something which I already have, rather than okay, I don't have process ETW. Okay, we don't have Sysmon. We don't have some advanced level logging. Yeah, next slide, please. So some of the technical prerequisites is, yeah, what is your business all about? What are your business priorities and roadmap? If you could have a high level network architecture, or if you have information about asset and their purpose, internal users DB, understanding what's normal in your estate, understanding your geographical presence. So this is important because if you know that, okay, you have geographical presence in these regions, and I should see network connections only from these regions, or I should see some engineers logging on only from these regions. Understanding various VPN vendors you have and the assigned IPs to these VPN vendors helps to maybe create a use case or create a detection to look out for um, any um, any remote logins. Other than these legit IPs, identify several critical or targeted ICS assets, understand which asset matters to you the most, and where is it located, and what logging is available in this asset. Distinguishing where IT stops and where OT begins. I know it's not easy, but a lot of attacks which we have seen in the past. Um, there was, I mean, there are various situations, or there are various incidents where we have seen, okay, there's an attack on IT environment. For an example, yeah, we have seen the slide for all the attacks in APAC. We could take any of the example, and there are a lot of attacks which are typical ransomware attack, and it's on IT environment. But if you don't know where your IT stops and OT begin, this means you don't know how deep attacker how deep threat actors have already moved in. Uh, so we have seen cases where, oh, okay, something has happened. Management decided to shut down the plant, or management decided to isolate the network. Why? Because they don't know where their IT stops and where their OT begins. Yeah, next slide, please. So these are some technical prerequisites, meaning some of the logs which you could take a focus on, or where you could concentrate on in terms of hunting in your OT environment. Some logs from your DNS server. If you have a separate domain controller, indeed logging that helps. PLC code changes, data historian logs, or engineer workstation logs, SCADA, RTU, or logs from your sys. Understanding, do we have any logging mechanism? I mean, yeah, we would not have answer to everything, but if we could reach out to the vendor and see what are the logging mechanism enabled, and what is the type of log source, how the access log stored in the gets stored in the machine, and can we remotely transfer these logs to any of our machines, or any of our maybe our SIM. Yeah, next slide, please. So these are some of the logs which every EDR vendor or every MDR vendor are grabbing these days. So if you see, there's a reference at the bottom. If you want to dig deeper in terms of what do you mean by process activities? Do you log process activity? Do you have registry activity? Do you log scheduled task? Do you log service creations? So if you take a look at this spreadsheet, you have more detailed logging mechanism, which you could use, let's say tomorrow, if you want to get started in threat hunting. And if you want to grab any of these, maybe process creation, process being suspended, or process termination, or process manipulation. Yeah, next slide, please. Um, so various vendors or various organization have defined types of threat and based on their own requirement. There's no strict or defined types or categories, but I think this is one of the easiest one, where if you split threat hunt into two, in terms of one is operational threat hunt, another is non-operational threat hunt. It makes it easier for you to know, okay, in operational threat hunt, where can I hunt? So next, next slide, please. So operational threat hunt meaning, uh, what are the historical true positive cases in your environment? What are the historical samples which you have seen in your estate? And another question is, do you store samples from your previous true positive cases? It's something which we need to think of, because if a threat actor is targeting your environment, there are high probability that he might come in. And yeah, if you don't store the samples which is seen in the past, it means you're losing track of what the sample did previously, and what's the change in the new sample by the same threat actor who's targeting my organization. Historical TTPs seen in the environment, maybe top 10 TTPs, which were most often associated with a true positive case, baseline of tools, maybe processes, services, schedule tasks, startup items, or run keys in your ICS or OT zone. UBA baselining tried to understand who can access critical assets, from where, how, when, how often. So if you baseline this, if you could do this in-house, if you could try to do this baseline in-house, you don't need to rely on someone else to do this for you. I think, yeah. But if you start thinking, these are some of the items we could create something from scratch. Baselining PLC or SCADA change, what types of change is normal in my PLC or SCADA devices, and how often do I see, and threat intel from various ICS or OT vendors. So if you see, there are a lot of threats which happens, but not every threat is known to public. So there are some threat intel vendors who would provide early threats which are happening specific to your industry or specific to your region. So indeed, it helps if you're taking a look at some threat intel vendors who are sharing reports specific to your organization. Next slide, please. Non-operational threat hunt meaning anything which is not part of my operations. Um, it could be threat intel driven, maybe some report which you have seen lately, and which you know that, okay, this APT group is targeting my industry, and they are targeting my region. So try to understand what the report is about. Entity driven, understanding your roadmap, or try to understand how and what is required for your company to reach this goal, and what would threat actor focus on for you to not reach this goal. Hypothesis driven, as I said, hypothesis is something where, yeah, you see run DLL executing with no command line arguments. Is it normal? No, run DLL 32 should always execute with some command line arguments. Framework driven, maybe. So if you see a lot of low key levels or a lot of small threat actors, they are still using open source framework like C2 frameworks or Atomic, or Sliver framework, or Posh or WorldStrike. This is still seen widely. So I think, yeah, some of the process or some of the steps I'll quickly go through is, yeah, generating an idea, maybe via, if you have seen some blog lately, okay, I see some cool technique. So understand the technique first, understand how it works, why it works, Do you have a isolated lab to execute some technique, or or could you spin up a VM and try to execute some technique in your VM and try to identify what indicators, what are the probable indicators which you could see or which you could come up with post executing the technique. Fidelity forecasting, meaning now you know that okay, run DLL will never execute with an argument. Can I look in my environment, maybe in my sim, to see what types of events do I see? Historical hunting, if you have enough capabilities, can we do a retrospective hunt once we have solid indicators that okay, these are some of the anomalous activities which these are some of the anomalous hypotheses which we could use to hunt in the environment. Analysis and response, yeah, I mean, once you find any infections, it's time to investigate and then try to automate it. So when you um, when you think some hypothesis is worth rehunting, try to automate this hypothesis rather than manually hunting it over and over again. Maybe create a rule in your sim or create a rule in your MDR, ADR, or whatever product you have. And then, yeah, reviewing the technique or reviewing what types of events do you see once you create a detection rule for it. Yeah, next slide, please. Some hypotheses which are specific to ICSCYBERSECURITY environment. Yeah, comparing project hash file. Do you have means to look at the project files in your PLCs? Could you continuously look at the hash, and could you store it somewhere, and could you compare it after a week or every day? Could you do some kind of automation, maybe using some internal scripting, some scripting built in-house, comparing config file hashes on PLCs, HMIs, or SCADA, hunt for USB execution connections on engineering workstation and OT network, hunting for access to project files. Do you have means to look at who is accessing this file? And you know that this is a project file and this shouldn't be accessed by everyone. um, Hunt for any attempt to connect to your PLCs remotely from non-engineering workstation, presence of a network sniffer in a OT network, monitoring load spikes and valleys. I know, I mean, a lot of us would say it's not our job. We have a different team who would keep an eye on the load spikes and valleys. But I think, yeah, indeed, I know there was a lot of discussion around this, but yeah, every environment is different. And uh, could you monitor load spikes and valleys, and at the same time, could you try to correlate with your IT logs? This gives a solid indicator that okay, I see some suspicious activities on the machine, and this machine connected remotely to um, HMIs or SCADAs or PLCs, and then I see some load spike and valleys since then. Script execution in engineering workstation. Are we supposed to see any script execution at all in ICS and OT? If yes, what types of scripts should execute? Remote access to HMIs from non-engineering workstation, unauthorized command message. Yeah, if you have an IPS, an IDS, or if you have some network anomaly logger, setting up some fake ICS honeypots. And if you see any connection towards this honeypots, can you investigate SQL injection attack on historian servers, or yeah, as I said, script execution in OT network. Yeah, next slide, please. I think the outcome of a threat hunt is finding any threat actors in the estate in the early stage, rather than coming to know about an attack after the bigger damage has been done already. Or another outcome could be create a new detection rule or fix existing detection rule, identify some log sources which is missing in our estate, and find if we could enable some logging, maybe if we could enable some Sysmon or maybe 46888 by Microsoft, uncover active threats and misconfigurations, maybe assess risk, what types of devices or what types of systems are prone to attack or could be easily attacked by a threat actor. uncover insider threats. Yeah, I mean, no matter how many threat controls, how many preventive controls you have in place, insider threats are not an easy target, are not easy to identify. Understand your environment better. Yeah, another, or maybe I would say the most important aspect or most important outcome of a threat hunt is you understand your environment better. And when you understand your environment better, you would be in a better position to understand what's normal in my environment and what's not. Maybe even better than any other vendors who would say, okay, we can do everything. I think, yeah, the one who is working in the field, he has a better knowledge about what's normal in my environment and what's not. Yeah, I think by this, yeah, we end our slide. If you guys have any questions, feel free.
Yeah, I think we do have already several questions in Q&A session, right?
Yes. So let me read out them. So Deep Sen is asking how threat hunting approach differs from IDS/IPS for SOC team.
Maybe, I mean, yeah, I'm happy for him to ask the question again, or because, yeah, it's not very clear.
So he is asking how does it differ the threat hunting approach that we discussed. We already have IDS or IPS that is interfaced to the SOC.
I think,
yeah.
sure.
Sorry. Let me kick off this answer. So I think that this question perfectly references to what Salman was talking about. So there are two approaches: proactive and reactive approach. So if we are talking about SOC team or IDS and IPS, this is absolutely reactive approach. So threat hunting, this is like proactive approach when you are trying to understand what can be happening around you, around your assets. So Salman, please feel free to continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I think, if you take a look at the logs we have from IDS or IPS, I think no matter what logs you have, what is important is don't rely on tools to do the job. I mean, in the end, it's human who would make more sense of what this log is, because no matter what's the signatures, it's not auto written. In the end, it's written by some human who did an analysis on, okay, if we see these kind of anomalies in our IDS or IPS, trigger an alert. So what I would say is, uh, threat hunting is applicable to any log sources, not specific to IDS or IPS. But yeah, if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer you maybe personally. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, yeah, it's not very clear about what's your expectation from the question.
Right. Yeah. So we have few more questions. Then maybe we can ask him to unmute if he's still in the call. All right. So we have a question from Daniel. Is there a database on which ICSOT vulnerabilities were exploited in the past years? We hear mainly about IT-directed ransomware, which may have an impact on ICSOT.
Okay, I can start again here. So I know there are a couple publicly available databases. I think CISA has a something like a known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, and there are other companies who provides the similar services like open service or like commercially available services. So there are several data sets that can be used as the known exploited OT or ICS vulnerabilities, or the vulnerabilities that were exploited in the OT segment. Not only that directly belongs to the industrial control system, but some IT or nearby technologies. And we hear mainly about IT-directed ransomware, which may have impact on. Yes, yes, we saw several examples when attackers were targeting IT and OT parts of the companies to do the ransomware attacks. And we saw several, we believe, occasional infections when there was like a wormable vulnerability being exploited in the network, and occasionally that vulnerability was exploited in the OT part with the ransomware on board. So there are several examples of that.
All right. So next question is from Abdul. Is the understanding of ICS protocol for the security solutions still a challenge? And continuing, any possible protocol standard for communication so the security researchers can keep up with potential or possible attacks? To what extent and how the threat hunt can be possible in an OT environment?
Okay. So there are several proprietary, there are several types of the industrial protocols. There are like open known, publicly available standards of protocols, and there are like 100% proprietary, not encrypted, but proprietary protocols. So if you're keen to know more about OT industrial protocols, you can start with the simple ones like, for example, DNP3 or Modbus or some other publicly known examples. If you want to learn more about proprietary protocols, if you want to do, for example, vulnerability research or threat research, or you want to write your own custom-made rules for that kind of protocol, I think you need to rely on the. I think you need to use a lot of reverse engineering to understand the protocol type, the fields in the protocol, and so on and so forth. So there are several approaches to solve that kind of question. And so the next part of the question was to what extent and how threat hunt can be possible in OT environment. It depends on the again your goal. So as Salman was explaining, it depends on what type of information you have, what types of logs you have. You can start from the classical, let's say, IT threat hunting. You can see if there is any abnormal activities coming from IT or from your, let's say, employees. If you see like people injecting like suspicious USB drives, and you see like spikes on the infection. So there are several things to start from. And if you want to extend your current threat hunt for OT, I think you definitely need to write several IDS or IPS rules for specific industrial protocols. And see what you have. There are so many publicly available IDS IPS rules. There are a lot of YARA rules publicly available, so plenty of things to start from.
All right. So another question from Ari. How to monitor, detect, and block from Lockbit 3.0 or other ransomware with various TTP to ICS/OT network?
So Lockbit is just one of the group of professional attackers that are on the radars and publicly known for some period of time. The Lockbit, let's say, infection, the ransom part, the encryption part is only the last stage of the attack. So previously, you need to detect a lot of steps like initial access, lateral movement, escalation of privileges, and so on and so forth. So there are common tactics and techniques how to detect, excuse me, how to detect all the previous stages, but if we're talking about the encryption stage itself, there are several things that can protect you from it. Some modern AV like antivirus, anti-malware solutions, enterprise level solutions, they do have components that protect you from the ransomware. So they basically detect if there is like a encryption routine is happening right now, and they just block the process. There are modern MDR or XDR solutions that also help you to detect that kind of things. Like we do have KADR, KADR, modern DR. We have like a specially dedicated industrial EDR solution. So many things to solve. But if we are talking about the threat hunting and how to update your TTPs, for example, we do have our threat intelligence portal, tip.kaspersky.com, tip.kaspersky.com, and we do have open tip. So this is a publicly available. You don't pay any money to get access to that to those reports. You just need to send the request, and then you will get the approval. So you need just to stay. You need just to monitor modern tactics and techniques that are being used. You need to subscribe to different security communities, security researchers groups, and they usually publish a lot of useful TTPs for you. So I don't know, Salman, if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I think the idea is there will always be a new threat actor, and like if you see Byline, they are everywhere. Or if you see Blackbuster, that there's a lot of incident which has happened, or maybe. So the idea is to don't just focus on one threat actor like Lockbit. Try and approach based on hypothesis. For example, if you see for a ransomware attack to happen on an environment, it would not be a direct ransomware attack. Yeah, obviously it would be via some email, and then the attacker checks if he has admin rights on the machine, and he would further dump credentials via dumping your LSAS process, or maybe Mimikatz, and then he would move laterally to any other IT admin or domain admin machine. So these are some of the techniques. Like first, he would send an email like initial access. He would deliver it via email, and then he would try to previsk on the machine. So these are some of the indicators which would happen on any machine. Let's say, for example, encrypting all the files on the machine. There is file ETW provided by Microsoft, or maybe file access events by Sysmon, which means if you have these logs in your environment, an easy rule would be change of maybe 10 file extensions which were changed in 10 seconds or maybe 2 seconds. It's not for a human to change file extension of maybe 10 files to a same extension in a fraction of second. So you could easily create a detection rule in your environment to look out for modification, or maybe file access event, change in the file extension, 10 files being changed in 2 seconds. So that's an easy way or an easy win for anyone who wanna hunt for maybe encryption or encryption of files or in their environment. If that answers.
All right. So yeah, Puneet, would you like to ask the question yourself? Maybe others can too. They can unmute them and ask them directly.
Yeah, so Salman, but I'm having one question. How threat hunting can contribute for predicting or assessing the likelihood of potential threats in OT system? Because whatever the threat hunting you are doing, after you are getting some threat, then you are doing the hunting.
Okay. So I think, I mean, it's a good question. So what I would say is it indeed helps to predict. So if you see, let's say some new threat actors, they come up with some set of techniques, and there's a report on it that, okay, they are using, maybe for an example, there's a bunch of reports by DFIR. There's a group or there's a blog DFIR report where they have extensive sharing about what types of techniques they saw in this attack, what groups or what set of payloads were used. And next day you see some other threat actors are using same set of techniques. Um, Maybe I'll give an example of so recently there was increase in usage of malicious OneNote file where any threat actor he could create a payload. He could create a malicious OneNote file and he will send it to you. And if anyone opens that OneNote file, the OneNote application opens in your machine. And then if he hides a image above it, and if you click at the image, you wouldn't see what's behind it, and there'll be a remote connection to a suspicious domain, and the payloads will be dropped on the machine. So this was something which was observed recently, and since then, if you see, there are a lot of threat actors who started leveraging this technique. So my say is, uh, if you are monitoring what types of threats is seen in the industry, maybe via some threat intel channel or maybe via Twitter. Twitter is indeed very powerful. If you're following set of researchers in Twitter, they would post, okay, today we have seen someone emoted who is using HTA file, and then maybe someone is using a VBS file which is bundled with zip, which means there will be no mark of the web in that file. So if you're following some intels from maybe some groups or maybe some tweets, or if you have subscribed to some threat intel channel, you'll see what type of threats or techniques is seen. And if you try to compare what types of other techniques are seen in the industry, you would see that there is indeed a lot of similarity. Why? Because tomorrow a new technique comes up, and advanced or any threat actor would never
So no,
use same
my
set of
next question
techniques.
is regarding this only. How you
Mhm.
are thinking about the 0-day threat hunting?
I think,
What is
see,
your thought
regardless
process
of,
for that?
so let's say I'll take an example for the move it thing. So recently there's a bunch of threat actors who abused the move it vulnerability. So I would say threat hunting helps in this phase as well. Why? Because you are doing threat hunting based on anomaly, based on what is not normal. An easy win would be, I mean, in our session, I highlighted, try to do a baseline of what are the common processes seen in your environment. Maybe in that phase you identified, okay, I see in our ICS or OT environment, we are using MoveIt to transfer some files. And if you are, I mean, it would be a disaster at the current moment. But at the same time, if you had baselined what are the common process in my ICS or OT, what are the common scripts, then you would have a list. Okay, I see we are using moveit .exe. So do a baseline in terms of this this moveit application. What are the common grand process? What are the common child process for this? What what are the does it has capability to touch your registry key? Does it has does it has capability to reach out to internet? So these are some of the hypothesis based hunt which one might have done during conducting threat hunting. This means no matter how many 0 days comes, um, you know what is in your environment, and you have bunch of detections which would alert based on something which is normal in your environment will be excluded, and anything which you see as not normal, like the move it example thing. Yeah, I mean, if that answers,
Okay,
or if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer.
we will have that another session with what I see. This is the high level view. So let's say if we
Mhm.
can have some practical session of any of the threat hunting process.
Yeah.
Just we take a one threat hunting and then we have a practical session kind of thing that how that any threat is being hunted. So that could be
Okay.
useful to people and they can also understand how that process is getting impacted with the threats and how the hunting is helping us to prevent the process to work safely.
Okay. Makes
So
sense.
I think Deep Singh Govind wants to ask question. I'm unmuting you. Yeah, you are unmuted. You can ask the question.
Yeah, hi, thank you, Puneet. Yeah, hi, King Sal. Thank for this session. I just want to know means like we are already using IPS and IDS for that to detect the threats and threat actors. So what approach King's Kaspersky is using to find out the threat actors and threats? Means to differ from the how it differs from that one.
Okay, we do have several approaches to detect threats on the different levels. Depends on the what kind of network we're talking about. So let's start from the IT part. In the IT network for enterprise, we do have starting from the classical anti-malware solution that basically right now, if you install the modern antivirus, it's not only the antivirus. It's a bunch of different tools and technologies that help you to protect your environment from various kind of threats.
I'm working in the renewable sectors, and more of the sites are on the onshore and offshore sites. So
Uh-huh.
how your approach will benefit to me in that areas?
We do so for industrial networks. We do have a special solution called KICS, Kaspersky Industrial Cybersecurity, and it protects both things: network anomalies. So it protects you from the network anomalies and anomalies happening on your computers. So it protects your workstations. All the things, all the threats are sent to CM to do the correlations.
Yes,
So you
right.
can correlate all the events. You have like a dashboard with all the events, and you can see the correlations, and you can understand if this like ongoing attack or if this is just your, I don't know, your employee is being strange and doing some strange things. So we are protecting on the all layers, on all levels, and you as the security administrator can make a decision and
Okay.
you see all the data. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So we can proceed to the next question if we still have.
Yeah, we still have 5 minutes more. Abdul, you wanted to ask something?
Yeah, Abdulaziz.
Yeah, you can
Okay,
unmute yourself.
I hope I'm audible, and thank you so much for the session. It is really a great one, and thanks to you, both of you, especially for the Kaspersky. I have been working on the Kaspersky products as well. So my question is now the considering the Stuxnet, which was like at the time when it was exploited or it was uh, used against the targeted operation, I mean targeted objective. So it was one of the perfection. It has one of the perfection delivery. So for me, uh, I would just want to ask you, how do you see the security at that time? The technology that is being used. Um, I would love to name it like Iran. It is already public. So at the time it was used at there. How do you see the technology at the time was and till today is defensive and the preventive mechanisms? How it has been improved in this case especially. Likewise, I
Okay.
have seen by the time I have one of the challenge I have seen now these days is the protocol understanding for the solutions. Uh, I'm not going for the threat hunting in this, but the main reason, but the main the concern was always been the for the solution is the understanding of the protocol. So how do you see this, please?
Very good question. So going back in time, and if we're talking about Stuxnet, Stuxnet was actually the attack that has started the whole industrial cybersecurity business right now, as we can see it. So before Stuxnet, not so many companies, not so many people were thinking and concerning about industrial cybersecurity, and the Stuxnet was like a point of no return for the whole IT cybersecurity industry. And after that, so we see like a big branch of IT cybersecurity specialists focusing especially on the OT industrial systems or Internet of Things systems. So yeah, that was like a big start for global business. If we are talking about the security solutions, how they were changed since the time, they have changed a lot, believe me. Starting from after the Stuxnet, a lot of companies, most of the companies actually started doing their network detection tools to detect any abnormal activities in the network, and we also started doing it. And then we realized that besides that, we need to protect not only the network, but we need to protect the workstations. But we cannot install classical anti-malware solution on the workstation, on the industrial workstation, because it will heavily load the microprocessor, the memory, and everything. So my colleagues, they have rewrote the whole product, especially for industrial control system computers, for operator workstations. So it's a very lightweight anti-malware solution that basically does not load the system at all. If we're talking about the global business, right now a lot of companies are using machine learning and AI technologies and approaches to protect the industrial control systems. Actually, my colleagues are sitting right in that corner of the building. They're working in the team called MLAD. Machine learning anomaly detection. Several years ago, they just decided to use a very, let's say, new modern approach. Let's use machine learning to detect abnormal activities in the industrial network. So they're monitoring like different events. It's basically a very smart and intelligent CM solution, like next generation CM solution, I would say. And they started doing the first tests, and they realized that they have very good success rate in detecting the very early stages of attacks or of any abnormal activities. So right now, basically, the industry is moving towards the implementation of different machine learning techniques or AI techniques, or let's say next generation techniques to detect, let's say, early stages of attacks, or let's say next generation of attacks, like very complicated, very sophisticated attacks.
I think specifically for the AI and ML, when it comes to the endpoints, especially used for the ICS or OT purposes, ML or AI can be useful, which I believe like, but the issue always remains, I think, for me, and I have have been reading out for this, that the performance always been an issue. So for those endpoints, obviously performance would be an issue, and the technologists, especially the researchers, are always looking for the network traffic inspections and other things, looking forward for, especially on the not on the only on the endpoint level, but especially for the network level. So considering if we go for the network still, we have the challenge of proprietary and non-proprietary protocols. So do you think in a standard should be there where the OT technologies and should be considered to be on the same page, kind of?
This is very difficult. This is a very good question, but very good, simple question, but very, I have very, let's say, difficult answer. Let me explain you. So there is like a big number of the protocols. If we are touching the topic of proprietary protocols, this is like absolutely madness and hell. I'm sorry for that kind of references, but this is actually true. Almost every vendor, every industrial control system provider, they try to create their own specific protocol because they believe that they know better than the others what the devices, solutions should look like. They're absolutely right in that kind of thoughts, but they try to create their own communication protocols for some reason. The community was trying to solve that kind of issue, and you are absolutely right to create the standard. So there are several open standards, OPCUA, for example, right, or Modbus. So you can go to GitHub and see the documentation. You can see the implementations of the of that kind of protocols, and you can use it in your daily life. But if you if you install some SCADA system from one vendor, or you take the PLC programmable logical controller from another vendor, you will definitely meet some proprietary protocols, and that's very difficult. So we cannot force the whole industry to use one or two specific protocols. No, that's impossible. There are several standards, several protocols for, let's say, for energy sector, right? And they're being widely used by this specific sector because they are focusing on the specific devices, specific communication challenges, communication types, and so on and so forth. But create just 2 or 3 of them and force the whole industry to use them, that's unfortunately or fortunately, that's impossible.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you so much again, both of you.
All right. There is one question by Ishwar. Not sure if he's still on the call. Is it passive threat hunting or active threat hunting? And is there any chances of affecting the normal operation?
I think it depends on what approach one might take. But for me, honestly, being on the defensive side, uh, I mean, it's a challenge if you're thinking from an offensive perspective, like if you're doing an aggressive scan on your OT network. It's not one of the best approach. So what I would say is, if you're doing threat hunting in your ICS or OT environment, try to understand what types of log set do you have passively rather than actively querying your assets, or doing an Nmap scan, or doing a vulnerability scan using any open source scanner. If you want to get started on threat hunting in your ICS and OT, try and understand, do you have the basic or most popular telemetry which would be seen every time? And when I talk about telemetry, the first thing comes on everyone's mind is, for something to happen, for your machine to get infected, there has to be some binary, either a file on a file on disk, or either a fileless malware, but it has to be injected on a process. This means process CTW is indeed essential. So try to look, do you have process CTW? Do you have a logging for whenever a process executes in a machine? Do you have any log for that? Do you have sysmon, or do you have 4688? Or if a threat actor comes on your machine, if he has access to your machine, what else he would do? Yeah, he would do an inventory. He would do reconnaissance. He would try to connect to other machines on the network to see what are the easy targets, or he would try to understand if at all your current if at all the machine which he has access to, is it even related to OT or ICS. Um, and he could do this via touching some registry keys. If you so an easy or a well-known mechanism where threat actors would choose is, they would look at some specific registry key to check if the machine is running any SCADA or ICS software, or they would check for running process to see, is this machine somehow oriented to some operations which would be seen in a typical ICS or OT environment. So do you have do you log registry keys, registry writes? Do you log file access events? Do you log network ETW? Do you log partial logging? Do you have the usual 4624, the successful logons or log off? So some telemetry maybe make a list like, okay, we are going to start with top 10 telemetry, which is going to be most fruitful. And then we are going to hunt in our ICS or your OT environment. So no matter how different your environment is, most commonly used operating system is still Windows, meaning you still can log various telemetries like the basic one, event IDs via event IDs, or the advanced one is ETW feeds. So that's what a lot of MDR or EDR guys are doing these days. They are trying to hook ETW events, and with this ETW events, they'll get various logs which are fruitful, which is not junk. So I think, yeah, my approach would be I would try to hunt passively rather than doing some real-time scans on any of the assets. Yeah, if that answers your question.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Any other question?
Yeah, that's it. I guess we are already 10 minutes. Due now. I think yeah, we can end the session, and maybe if there are further questions, we can always take it and share it with you all. I guess Salman is already in the group, so I'm sure he will be able to answer. So I guess we can end the session. Puneet, do you have anything to share?
Yes, I would like to thank you, Salman and Vladimir, for taking time to share your valuable insights to the community. And we would like to have such more sessions from you. And mainly, we are looking for some practical session of activity in OT system. So that would basically the people will be able to understand how a threat looks like. That's it.
Very good. Thank you, colleagues, and many thanks for all of you who had several questions for us. Some of the questions were really good, really interesting. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Vladimir. Thank you, Salman. Thank you, everyone,
Thank you.
for joining today. Good evening, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are. Have a good weekend. Yeah, see you again in the next one. Thank you. And
Hey,
take
thank
care.
you so much, guys.
Bye-bye.
It was a pleasure.
Bye.
Have a great day.
Thank you.